Hello everyone and welcome to our presentation. We're going to be talking about the transition from dinosaurs to birds. I'm Emily and this is Preston and Vanessa and Shannon. In order to do this, we're going to be using our literal phylogenetic tree. We're going to be talking about the roots, the ancestral species, moving up the tree, and then we're going to look at living birds and how they can be at the top of the tree and fly away. So, to start out with, I'm going to be talking about the roots of the ancestral species and the environment that they lived in. So, they mainly lived in the Jurassic period, in the Mesozoic era that consisted of the Triassic, Jurassic, and Cretaceous periods. The Jurassic period that we're going to talk about first lasted about 100 million to 200 million years ago. And it lasted for 54 years. Million years. Sorry. So in the Jurassic period, we have Pangaea that was separated into two continents, Laurasia and Gondwana, and this was separated by the Tethys Seaway. All right. It was called the Jurassic period because of the Jura Mountains. That was a very rocky mountain range. And it was also called the Age of the Reptiles because of the dinosaurs and the reptiles that we found in the Jurassic period. So the climate of the Jurassic period was very hot and humid, and there was a lot of small carnivorous dinosaurs running around. Then we move on into the Cretaceous period, which is directly after the Jurassic period. And in the Jurassic period, we find our intermediate species, the Archaeopteryx, which we're going to talk about later. And excuse us for the dinosaur names. We're going to probably struggle through this. So in the Cretaceous period, we have very warm, humid climate again. Polar regions were covered by forests where we have dinosaurs running around, and then dinosaurs were the dominant group of land animals that we're going to see in this time period. At the end of the Cretaceous period, dinosaurs had become extinct, and most of our present-day continents were separated into where they are now, just about. So our ancestral species that we're going to talk about, the root species that we find down here at the bottom of the tree, were discovered around the early 1860s, and they're called the Maniraptoran theropods. And some characteristics of these theropods were they had hands with small fourth and fifth digits. They had wrist bones called semilunate carpal, which were unique traits for this group. They're the only dinosaurs and species that had these during their time period. They had a collarbone called a forcula, a pelvis, which is located at the bottom of their bodies, which is called a pubis bone, which was pointed downward. They had a breastbone, which was also a characteristic that only dinosaurs had during this time period. They had a short, stiff tail. They had very long arms, and their hands were bigger than their feet. Their main source of locomotion were running, and they were meat eaters, but there have been some discussion lately about whether they were omnivores instead of carnivores, so that's still kind of being debated. And then the last thing is that they laid eggs that looked very similar to the eggs that birds laid today.
So, as Emily just mentioned, the Maniraptoran dinosaurs did lay eggs, and there are fossils of these eggs and of nests that have eggs in them. An examination of these fossils have provided evidence that the eggs of these dinosaurs were very similar to the eggs of living birds today. And there are also fossils of dinosaurs in the nests that are in brooding positions that are very similar to the brooding positions of birds today, which suggests that not only did dinosaurs lay eggs similar to birds, but they also brooded and behaved similar to birds.
So now we're going to go into the derived characteristics of when dinosaurs developed the similar characteristics as we see in birds today. So our first one is going to be right around here-ish with our Tyrannosaurus, and that's going to be with feathers.
So the feathers, basically there was a reconstruction of color pattern which helped to determine the function. And some of these functions included thermoregulation, camouflage, communication, and species recognition or display. And they were also used to defend the nest and keep eggs warm.
So there was examination of the molecular structure of fossilized dinosaur feathers, and they looked at the melanosomes, which are the organelles involved in pigmentation of the feathers. There's a picture of them right here. They're very tiny structures. And the examination of the fossilized dinosaur feathers compared to the extant living birds, their melanosome structures were identical. So it's a very strong molecular evidence that birds did actually descend from dinosaurs.
And then our next drive characteristic that we're going to talk about is beaks, which we're going to find right around here.
So there's a video showing about how the beaks formed. So basically what happens is that the teeth gradually reduce in number, and then the two bones, premaxillary bones, they fuse to become the beak, but they stay separated in dinosaurs, alligators, and ancient birds to form the snout. Reptiles and mammals have two patches of activity where there's one on either side of the developing nasal cavity, whereas birds only have one large one that spans across the front of the face, and that's because of the specific pattern of gene expression for those birds.
So there was this very cool experiment done with this. As Shannon was just saying, the snout is characterized by two patches of gene expression on either side of the snout area, whereas beaks are characterized by one large patch across the entire front of the snout area. So there was a group of people who identified the different types of gene expression in birds versus other species, like say alligators, and then they chemically suppressed the gene expression in the center of the snout area in chicken embryos to see what development would happen. And they discovered that the chicken embryos developed a structure more similar to an alligator's snout than to a chicken's beak. And there's a picture here. It's a little bit small, but you can see that this is how a normal chicken embryo's beak develops. And this is an alligator snout for comparison. And this center picture is an example of what they found in the chicken embryos that had the suppressed gene expression in the center. And what this indicates is that when birds were developing beaks, they didn't actually come up with a completely new gene to develop a beak. They just changed the expression of an existing gene to have a new derived characteristic.
Okay, and that brings us to our intermediate species, which is the Archaeopteryx. Now, some may think that an intermediate species between a bird and a dinosaur would look somewhat like this guy with a dinosaur head and a bird body. If you come up closer, you can see. It's pretty cute. But it actually looks similar to this, these two species, and Preston's going to talk more about him.
All right, so here we have Archaeopteryx, a small, two-legged carnivorous dinosaur living in the late Jurassic period, which, so about late 201 million years ago to as early as 145 million years ago. And ecologically, or I say you could say geologically, this is around the time where North America began to split. And this certain individual is believed to be the earliest ancestor of today's birds. Though, if you look at its physical characteristics, its fossil record, and many of its structures, it is more closely related to its Mesozoic dinosaur ancestors. It has a long bony tail with vertebrae in it, and it has teeth. But like many of birds today and other species that came after it, it has feathered wings, it has arms and hands that were also feathered, which are believed to help it to glide, and some say to fly, though that has not been confirmed. Also, it has, and the teeth, or it was one of the last known species to have the teeth that were still in the jaw and had not had the two bone structures fused. Now, there's one distinct significance in the structures of Archaeopteryx were the bones of the hands, shoulder, pelvis, and feet that were not fused and were not reduced, which vastly hindered its ability to fly. and also its body structure, in which it was very small, ranging from today's birds of about either a robin or a blue jay, you could say, to as large to 1 foot and 8 inches long, almost as long as a raven.
And then we're going to talk about our derived characteristics that came after the Archaeopteryx, which we're going to start with body size.
So there's an unconventional link between adaptive radiation and modern day birds. Bird diversification was possible because the dinosaur lineage leading to birds didn't exhaust the niche space due to smaller size, which basically means that they survived better, they had an increased fitness for small body size because they didn't take up as many resources like the bigger dinosaur groups did. Another way that they didn't exhaust the niche space was because they diversified into a variety of ecological niches based on what they ate. So, like examples of seeds, sap, insects, fish, and meat. Whereas the other groups adaptively radiated and became bigger, so they did fill the niche space, which took up more resources, which eventually led to the mass extinction.
So how did this one line of dinosaurs become smaller instead of becoming larger? The examination of dinosaur and alligator embryos have discovered that they really look like birds. And so there are also fossils of baby dinosaur skulls, and they've examined these skulls and compared their structure and shape to bird skulls, and they found that they're very, very similar. So what they think might have happened is that the dinosaurs, their development was arrested before they reached their full body size and their typical adult characteristics, which is called paedomorphosis, or the retention of infantile characteristics into adulthood. So what happened is they developed and then just stopped at a certain point before they reached their full size, which led to a progressively smaller final size.
And our last and the most, debatably most important derived characteristic is going to be the development of flight.
So in flight, there was a big change in digits. Specifically, the 5th and the 4th digits were lost in birds, and the wrist bone underlying the 1st and 2nd digits consolidated and resulted in a semicircular form that allowed for the hand to rotate against the forearm, which helped move in a way that creates flight. So the bones reduced and fused together, which aided in flight. The bone walls became thinner and the feathers became longer, and the bony tail was reduced to a stump, and there was a spray of feathers at the end, which aided in maneuverability and stability. And body size actually helped with flight because they could only glide in the ancestral dinosaur species, but once the body size got smaller, the flight became possible.
Okay, and that brings us to our living birds, which are at the top of our tree, and Preston's going to talk a little bit about some homologous features of these birds.
Well, living birds of today show many homologous features. One of them being the feathers with the ability for flight. They are highly specialized and highly developed for flight, but they are derived from reptilian scales. Also, their beaks come from the jaws and teeth of their reptilian ancestors, and their bones are both hollow and fused, creating a better mobility and a lighter structure for flight. Also, you can move on to their elaborate courtship rituals, in which it could range from color and movement to complex dances that involve flight. Also, their ability to lay and incubate their own eggs, which is thought to be some of their innate behaviors that had been one of their ultimate causes for their evolution and adaptation of behavioral succession.
So that was basically it. We have our ancestral species at the bottom, and we're showing as they become more and more similar to our living species. Do you have any questions?
You said, so they're originally thought to be carnivores, one of those species, but then they're now thinking they're omnivores.
Yeah, just because they're not really sure, but originally, dinosaurs, they think they're always carnivores, and I think there's a few omnivores and herbivore dinosaur types, but they thought that birds came from the the carnivores. So now they're wondering if it's like different species of dinosaurs.
There's
but-
also later as the birds are specializing into different niches, they go from everywhere from seeds to insect eating and meat eating. So then there's like a wide range there, which suggests that possibly they already had the like digestive capability of eating all of those.
So those melanosomes you mentioned, those are responsible for color, right? So did those tell us what color dinosaur feathers were?
They have conducted color reconstructions, and they found that the feathers of dinosaurs were probably brown, black, and russet predominantly. But they, of course, that's still a theory rather than a proof.
You mentioned that like the feathers were for display too in the dinosaurs. Do they have evidence that they like had courtship behaviors and stuff like birds do now, or is there not enough evidence?
It's
for that?
really hard to find evidence for
Yeah.
that because of the, obviously you're looking at fossils, but like the brooding fossils suggest that some of the behaviors are like birds today, so it is possible that they did have similar courtship rituals.
But I think the early feathers were just very like hard and quill-like and hollow, so it wasn't as similar to a feather as we would think of today. It slowly progressed into like the soft feather that we would think of today. So probably not as much as we would assume.
One more. Can you explain again the chicken embryo thing? That's really cool.
Is there a specific part that you want
I'm
me?
excited about that over here.
Is there a specific part you want me to focus on?
Like, what? How did they let the chicken embryo develop without letting the bee?
Okay, so I'm not sure exactly the details because it got really technical, but they suppressed the expression of the gene in the center of the snout so that instead of being one long patch of expression, there was a short patch, a suppressed patch, and a short patch. And then it was more similar to the two patches that you'd see in like an alligator.
They didn't let them hatch. I think
No,
you
they,
said that.
they didn't let them hatch
Yeah,
for
'cause that would
ethical
be-
reasons.
that would be pretty messed
But
up,
they
wouldn't it?
looked at the structure that was developing.
So close to Jurassic Park.
Yeah.
This close.
I think it's awesome that they have reptiles and bird eggs that are fossilized, that you can do these kind of morphometric kind of analyses on and to see these similarities, like you were talking about the skull size and everything, and how similar they are in the fossilized eggs compared to modern day birds. So I just think that's really cool.
I was
I
surprised
don't have a
at how much
question about it, but I just think it's cool.
I was surprised at how much evidence we were able to find.
Yeah.